This is our intro music. This came on the podcast machine that I got. Is this a stock noise or someone else's? I don't know. We'll find out.
Stephen R. Covey once said, "Most people do not listen with the intent to understand. They listen with the intent to reply." We have something to say worth listening to. This is Real Talk. Real Talk. The podcast. Telling the story and lessons learned of industry leaders, entrepreneurs, professional athletes, and the movers and shakers of the business world. Have you been told no? Have you been told that you can't do it? Have you been told that you'll never get to the next level? That noise. Yeah, we said it. We're telling you you can do it, and you can get to the next level. If others have done it, so can you. Real Talk. This is Real Talk, the podcast. And this is your host, Mason.
Yo, what is going on, world? Today, we are joined by a man redefining what it means to be a man. Someone who has made their mark on the business world and is continuing to succeed in the world as a speaker, a writer, performance coach, men's health advocate, and author of the book, Becoming a Better Man. When something's gotta change, maybe it's you. Please welcome today my guest, Mike Cameron. Mike, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, Mason, glad to be here. Man, I love that intro. That was fantastic.
Thanks. I actually you are the first person who got to do the intro.
Nice.
So it just got finished. I had one I did myself before, but I found this guy and I heard his role and I was like, man, I gotta have him. He's awesome.
That's fantastic.
So,
well, that seek first to understand. That's one of my value mantras. So I love that.
So Mike, for anybody who's not familiar with you, what you're doing and kind of what sort of activities you're involved in, give us a little rundown of what you're currently involved in and how things are going for you.
Yeah, well, things are going all right. I mean, I had to do a little bit of a pivot, as I think all of us did last year in 2020. So I actually sold my business at the end of 2019 with the intent to hit the road as a professional speaker. So I've been speaking professionally in some capacity for the last really 20 years. And so that was the intent. And then, of course, COVID hit, and my last live gig was March 6th of 2020. So I had to pivot a little bit, and obviously, doing the virtual keynotes is wonderful, but it's just not the same. So I launched a coaching practice. I had a few clients that I worked with one-on-one individually. But COVID, freed up a whole lot of time for me. And so I got to dive into that, created some group programs, worked on a little bit of writing, and, just looking forward to the world opening back up again so we can get back at it the way it should be. So I'm excited about that. July 1st is when I'm in the province of Alberta. So we're dropping pretty much all restrictions come July 1st. So we get to get back to life a little bit.
Oh, so you guys aren't in full restrictions lifted mode yet?
Not yet. July 1st. So Thursday.
That's weird because we've been in it for about a month now, and I'm starting to get reacclimated to it. It's still a little. I still get halfway into a store and I'm like, do I have my mask? And I'm like, oh wait, don't need it. So it's really cool to hear your pivot story from 2020, because there's been a lot of similarities, I feel like, where people were like, yeah, my business really slowed down, took a big hit, obviously not doing your big public speaking gigs, and all of a sudden, but people are like, but I needed to fill that void with something. And that's where I've heard so many people were like, I put together programs, I was able to get myself organized, I was, all these benefits that I think are going to pay off tenfold down the road. Would you say that 2020 in a weird way was like a forced pivot point that, is probably going to benefit you in the future, even though it probably wouldn't have been a voluntary choice you would have made?
There's no question. I mean, yeah, again, it was definitely challenging. I mean, again, I'm in a pretty good position that, like I said, I sold my business in 2019 that I'd run for 16 years. So, it's not like I was scrambling for resources, which, might have made things a little bit different, but I was well resourced. to be able to handle that pivot and be able to handle that shutdown. Because again, in the speaking world, I mean, I went from fully booked to zero booked, so it wasn't a slowdown; it was a stop completely. But yeah, the reality is, it really gave me the opportunity to sit back, pivot, and just maybe observe a little bit more and look at what are the things that I actually enjoy doing. What is it that makes an impact in the world that I can uniquely contribute, and how do I start to leverage that? So yeah, absolutely. It's maybe been a little bit of a blessing as well.
That's really cool. So you said that you had your own business for 16 years, was it?
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that, because I imagine that's your where a lot of your background is comes from, I would imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been sort of sales and leadership has kind of been my gig forever. And I started when I was 23 years old. I started in the mortgage business in finance. And in 2003, I founded my own brokerage company, and did very well. I worked for the bank for a while, and just got tired of some of the restrictions and having to follow some of the brand protocols and the way they wanted to do things.
Could you break down what, like, anyone who's doesn't know
Sure.
what a brokerage company is and does? Tell us what you did.
Yeah. That's a great point. I tend to make assumptions that people know exactly what I'm talking about. But so when I started my career, I actually, and I joke, I literally went from bagging shit to building, founding, and ultimately selling a multi-million-dollar business. Because when I started my career when I was 18 years old, I worked at a garden supply wholesale company, and I was literally bagging steer manure for $10 an hour or whatever it was at the time. Ultimately, I ended up playing hockey with a guy that was having lots of fun, making lots of money, and I said, "So tell me what it is you do." And he said, "Well, I raise investment funds for development projects as a mortgage broker." And I said, "Okay, well, that sounds really cool and a hell of a lot better than bagging steer manure." And I had worked my way up through the ranks at the garden supply company and was at that point in sales. And so I said, "How do you do that?" So he told me a little bit about the educational requirements to get your mortgage brokerage license. And he said, "What I do is I go out and I find investors that are willing to put money into real estate projects, and we finance them by way of mortgages." So just like if you own a home, you probably have a mortgage. So same thing, but on a commercial development scale. So if we had a multi-million-dollar development project, we might go out, let's say we had to raise $1 million. We might go out and we might find 10 investors with $100,000 each. We'd secure it by way of a mortgage on the real estate, and they'd get a return on their investment. And usually it was sort of interim financing stuff. So it was before the banks were interested. So the return on investment was quite good. And then we'd finance it up until the point where a developer got to a point where the banks would start to look at it. And then when the bank financed out, the investor would get their money, and we'd go on and we'd do the next project. So that was kind of where I started. And then in 2003, again, there's a bit of a longer story there, because ultimately what happened in that organization, the guy I played hockey with ended up going to jail. Turned out
What?
Yeah, it turned out to be him and his business partner, turned out to be the largest mortgage fraud in Western Canada history. So it was a giant Ponzi scheme, sort of a Bernie Madoff thing, to the tune of about, I can't remember what Bernie Madoff's numbers were, but this wasn't quite that big. It was about $240 million. And
that's a substantially large number, nonetheless.
yeah, it's a big number. Yeah, so I had moved out to where I live now, which was about 1,000 miles away from where I was at the time. They gave me an opportunity to open up a branch office for them. And so I was young and dumb and naive and eager and keen. And, at 27 years old, I said, "Yeah, I'll go. I'll do it," because nobody else wanted to move. I lived in Vancouver, British Columbia, which is just a gorgeous spot to live. You've got ocean, you've got mountains. So when they said, "Yeah, we're going to open up an office in Edmonton," Not a lot of people put their hand up, but again, I was young and eager, and so I said, yeah, I'll go. And 1 month after I moved out to Edmonton to set up shop, I got a phone call from the regulator saying, yeah, so here's the thing. We're shutting you down because this is what's happened. And so I was 1 month into a new town, new job, new gig, and going like, holy shit, now what? And
Yeah, no kidding.
yeah. So it was quite the adventure. It was quite the adventure.
I imagine you had like a lease on, like a new place that you're staying at, and like, getting your life set up. Like,
Yeah,
So-
I had actually just gotten engaged to be married. I had convinced my fiance that we were moving to Edmonton, and like I said, literally it was 1 month and 2 days after we moved out here. We got everything settled. I got the phone call, and so then I just kind of looked at her, and so now I joke I'm on year 23 of my 5-year plan because we ultimately ended up staying in Edmonton.
oh, cool.
Yeah, so it was interesting because, yeah, talk about having to pivot. Like all of a sudden, I went from making a substantial amount of money to nothing. Like it's just
So where do you go from there? You get a call and like it's all over. Boom. What do you do?
yeah.
Like,
So at that point, I always knew that I was going to stay in the business. So I phoned up. So I held the licensing for our regulator in this province. So we're one province, one state over. So the licensing is provincial. So I held the licensing. So as soon as I got that phone call, I called up the regulator and I said, hey, look, this is what's happened. My intent is that I'm going to open up my own shop. I'm going to do my own thing. Is that cool with you? And he said, well, as long as you weren't under investigation, as long as you're not complicit in any of this criminal activity, I don't see why it would be a problem. And so I flash forward a little bit. I ended up applying for my licensing to set up my own shop. And yeah, it's fascinating because on one of the forms, it says, have you ever been convicted of? Have you ever been bankrupt? Have you ever had your license revoked or disciplinary action taken? And I checked no to all those things because I didn't personally have my license revoked. I mean, they shut down the company.
right.
So I checked no to all these boxes. So I submitted the application. Well, it turns out that was the wrong thing to say because by virtue of that company having their license revoked, therefore I was licensed under them. So therefore I had my license revoked and I should have checked yes and an explanation. So I thought, oh, okay, well, no big deal. Like I called you a month ago and told you what happened. So it wasn't like I was trying to keep it secret. And they said, yeah, it doesn't quite work that. You swore a false affidavit. That means we have to do an investigation and essentially your name is mud. So that was going to take 6 months. So again, now I went from, okay, I got a plan B. I'm just going to set up my own shop, do my own thing to, yeah, you're not doing anything. So
For like checking the wrong box.
for checking the wrong box. Yeah. It was,
Right,
it was
yeah.
unbelievable. Absolutely.
It wasn't even like, oh my gosh, what an idiot. I can't believe I did that. It was like, what? Like really the wrong box? Like that's what it was?
Yeah.
Like that's insane. Okay.
Yeah, it was
So-
it was just nuts. So I ended up the place that I leased. The guy that owned the place I leased, he was a construction guy. He was a cribber, so they pour foundations for basements. So I phoned him up and I said, "Hey, like you're busy as hell. Business was booming in the real estate market. That was 1998." I said, "I can't work for like 6 months. Have you got anything for me?" And he said, yeah, if you, sure. Like, you want to come swing a hammer, man? Like, I got tons of work. So I thought, this would be kind of cool. Like, I've financed these projects forever. For the last 5 years of my life, I had been on the sort of the white collar end of the equation and financed all these projects. And I thought, it might be a little bit fun to go out and see how these things actually get built. Yeah, not really my cup of tea. So I remember Aaron was the guy's name that owned the company, and I remember him standing across the construction site and resting on a shovel, and he's looking over at me, and I'm swinging a hammer, and I'm hitting my thumb, and like it's just not my forte at all. I remember him looking, "Hey, broker, how's it going over there?" Just like, you, fuck you. But you do what you got to do to make ends meet when the shit hits the fan. And ultimately, I ended up. The regulator came back and said, "Okay, we won't give you your own business license, but we'll let you work for another company as long as they're reputable and yada yada yada." So I ended up getting a job with one of the big banks in the same capacity.
All right.
And so that was kind of how I overcame that, and I worked there for 5 years, and then eventually I went out and started my own company.
Then they allowed. And so were you doing the same thing with your new company then?
Yeah. Yeah,
cool.
It
So
actually worked out not terribly because I was a new face in a new town. So it didn't work out too bad that I ended up getting a brand name behind me, one of the big banks. I worked there for 5 years. I learned all the ins and outs of the banking system. And then I went back and I always knew that at some point I would get back to brokering because as a broker, I've got access to a variety of financing products. When I worked for the bank, I just sold one bank's products. But as a broker, I had access to all the products. So
during that transition, but before you made that transition, while you were working there for like that 5 years, were you like itching to get out? Like in the moment, did you think that you're like, oh man, I got stuck? I want to do my own thing, and I got sucked into big bank, big corporate life, and how long am I going to be here?
Yeah, there was a little bit of that, but they pivoted a couple of times that made me think that maybe we can make this work. And then I was getting my wrist slapped for. Again, we were supposed to sell a certain percentage of certain products that were more profitable for the bank. And what I found was that those products often weren't what was best for my customer. So, corporate policy be damned, I'm going to do what's best for my customer.
Sure.
And so I was getting my wrist slapped because I wasn't towing the company line. I wasn't selling the more profitable products. So eventually I just said, you know what, this is bullshit. I'm out. And I gave my notice and started my own company. And that was, like I said, that was 18 years ago now.
So tell us some of the challenges of over the course of 17 years, I imagine you had at least one or two or 1,000 hiccups that, that any business owner deals with, but there's got to be one or two that really stick out where you're like, some real tough times or some real major issues that might have popped up, regulators, especially in your industry. I can only imagine that things just pop up and they're really big deals really quick.
Yeah. Well, again, for me starting, it was okay because I started small. Like it was just me as a one-man show. And then eventually I grew and as some of my former colleagues started to see me doing well, they'd start calling me and like, hey, what are you doing over there? And eventually a bunch of them, I had 5 or 6 of them come over, and we continued to grow and evolve. And for me, I think that was the magic. I mean, there's always challenges, but looking at, okay, where is the opportunity in this challenge? So about, 3-4 years in, we had a competitor that came out that started charging a very nominal amount, and they leveraged their national connections. So as a small independent broker, again, picture a small independent grocery store going up against Walmart or Costco.
Right, yeah.
So I was the small independent. So these guys came out and basically started allowing aggregation of small independents coming together under a banner, and they charged for that. So I was starting to potentially lose some of my brokers, my agents, which is where I made a good chunk of my money. So I had to figure out, I could either join this new competitor and give up a substantial portion of my revenue, or I could come up with an alternative. So I ended up creating an alternative. So essentially, again, it's a little hard to explain in 30 seconds, but what they were doing was they were aggregating the volumes of all the small independent brokerages, not all, but a bunch of small independent brokerages, so that when we went to our suppliers, they would say, okay, well, individually, Mike is 250 million. But if Mike is now part of 20 other, involved with a amalgamation of 20 other brokerages, now we're several billion. Therefore, we want better pricing. And to do that, he would have charged me an extra cut, which was stupid because it's the same volume that these suppliers, these lenders were getting ahead of time, but now they're just aggregated and it ends up costing them more because they've leveraged the power of the volume to negotiate.
Right.
So I long story short, I ended up creating a nonprofit called the National Alliance of Independent Mortgage Brokers. And I said to all the small independents, like, if they're going to do this on a corporate basis, why don't we just do this as a cooperative? We can all share and we can get the same advantages. And so we did. The problem was I ended up running essentially a corporate version or a free version of what they were doing corporately. So I ran that for 18 months, and then I said, you know what, this is stupid. This is not a nonprofit model. So I evolved it. I shifted it into a for-profit business, and so I just sent notice to everybody that was part of the coalition or the cooperative. I said, you know what, this isn't sustainable. Like, I can't put this much effort into it with making a nominal amount of money. I said, so we're going to pivot, we're going to change, we're going to charge you this. This is the new model. And we completely revamped the model. And that was eventually what I eventually sold. So that went really well. And we changed the face of the industry. So it was pretty exciting. Again, I'm a guy that likes to build things, right? So it was
no, and it sounds like you have a really innate ability to pivot.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a good thing for any leader or business owners. I think one of the hardest things you can do and one of the most impactful things you can do is change your mind.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
There's nothing like having someone who's red in the face. Like, and I've done it before, where like, I know I'm wrong, but like, I'm kind of like, I just don't want to admit it, and we give grief to some people who do that. And I think there's a fine line between being wishy-washy and holding your ground, in terms of making a decision. But at the same token, when, like you said, you started off as a nonprofit, and then you were like, all right, this needs a little extra juice. Like, we got to, like, in order to make this work. And it sounds like you did that. I mean, any business that lasts longer than a year is making it work. So you did it for 16 times that.
Yeah.
So
yeah, well, and that's one of the quotes I love that speaks to what you're talking about is strong opinions loosely held. So,
ooh, I like that.
Yeah, they use that a lot in the software and the tech business. But yeah, strong opinions loosely held. So, again, I felt very strongly about this need for a cooperative. And it was kind of this almost socialist model within this capitalist environment. And it was really, again, just a bunch of small independents coming together to create an environment where we could continue to brand, Mike Cameron's Mortgage Shop or Mason's Mortgage Shop, but still get the power of, the Costco's of the world, so to speak. But I didn't want to taint your business model if you had a specific way of doing business. And it caught on really well. So we grew very quickly.
Now, during from 07 to 09, I know, like, in the US, and I don't know if we touched on this, but Mike is in Canada. But during the U.S., we had the real estate financial crisis. Was that something that affected Canada? And if so, like, how did it affect you guys?
Yeah, absolutely it did. I mean, I think the advantage is our banking system was much stronger than yours. So, it didn't have quite the same impact. But what was interesting, in 2006, they made a bunch of regulatory changes up here that really opened the market. So 2006, 2007, we were killing it, like absolutely killing it. 2007 was my best year personally in sales ever. And then, yeah, 2008, the credit crisis hit. I mean, I remember getting the phone call. It was August. I think it was August of 2008. And yeah, the shit hit the fan, and like, holy crap, our world has changed, and we had to tighten up. I mean, we had leases on properties, and so I had commitments that we had to meet. And I think, for me, that was one of the smartest things I did. I was always fairly conservative. So when I tell you 2007 was my best year, I took as salary exactly the same in 2007 as I did in 2005, 2006, 2007, 2008, 2009, 2010. So I paid myself a set salary, and then those high years, allowed me to coast through the 2008, 2009s and not panic. And maybe not coast through, but just not panic.
Yeah, I mean, I think when things like that happen, I mean, there's really two mindsets to have. It's that like fight or flight panic mode, or that, hey, I'm set up for success because I put the planning into it, and you're able to, like you said, maybe not coast, but you weren't panicking.
Yeah, well, it's
it's
that preparing in the calm for the coming of the storm. And
absolutely.
So many people don't think about that. They don't think about the storm. The storm's coming. Like, I don't care what it is, whether it's the credit crisis, whether it's coronavirus, whether it's whatever. Like, the storm is coming.
There's always a storm like brewing. There always is.
Always.
I think it's just we get caught up in like, that won't happen again. That can never happen again, or not to me. That I'm not that kind of a person. And
right.
I mean, if you're set up correctly, you're right. You're not that kind of a person. You'll be fine. But if you're not set up, then you will be.
Yeah.
So tell us what eventually, so you said you sold your business. Tell us what kind of led you to that. I mean, that's a hard thing to do, to part ways after building up your baby like that and being so heavily involved, and then, finally stepping away and saying, hey, it's time to move on to the next chapter. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes. So, I mean, for me, that was really about moving from success to significance and looking at, how do I make an impact in this world? So in 2015, so my wife and I split up in 2012, and I spent probably 3 years, a good chunk of 3 years, just getting my own shit together, like getting connected with who I really am. And, by all outward standards, I was incredibly successful. I had the cars, the house, the beautiful wife, a successful business. I checked all the boxes. So by all outward measures, I was incredibly successful, and lots of people would have loved to have been me. But there was something missing. There was really something missing, and it ended up costing me my marriage. So I spent 3 years after that just trying to get reconnected with self. And, I found yoga, I found meditation. I got into endurance sports. So I did Ironman in 2013, and kept that up, since then. But really got connected with self. And then then I met, a woman that really changed everything for me. Carissa, she had this air about her, this presence. She was a yoga instructor, an artist, a photographer, a videographer, and just had the knack for finding beauty in everything. And that perspective really changed everything for me. And then in October of 2015, she had spent the night at my place and got up on Friday morning, October 2nd, to go teach yoga, as she always did on Friday mornings at 6 a.m. So alarm goes off at 5 o'clock. I'm in bed. I hear her get up. She comes around to my side of the bed, gives me a kiss, says goodbye. I said, have fun at yoga, and off she went. And I rolled over, went back to sleep, and got up around 7 o'clock, went downstairs, made some breakfast, shot her a text, as was our custom, at about 10 after 7. And I said, hey, how was yoga? and got no response. And I thought, okay, well, not a big deal. And well, Carissa wasn't a huge talker. She was an incredible listener. And as a result, often got sucked into long, drawn-out conversations with students after class. And so I went about my morning and finished up breakfast. I had an appointment downtown at 9 o'clock. So I shot her another text and said, hey, how you doing? I'm heading out. Didn't hear back from her, so I hopped in the car, drove downtown, tried phoning. The phone rang and rang and rang, ultimately went to voicemail. Went into my appointment, came out at 10. Still no response, still no text, no phone call. And now I'm starting to get a little bit worried. And you've got those voices in your head that are chattering at you. Like, dude, did you fuck something up? Like, were you a dick last night? Or like, is she mad at you?
But you're confused because you're like, but I didn't.
Yeah,
but what happened?
And then you jump to that, I hope everything's okay. And then you jump back to that, well, maybe I screwed up. And, so now I'm starting to get this feeling in the pit of my stomach. And I get back to my office. I had an 11 o'clock appointment. We finished that up. We ended up going across the street for lunch. And as we walked into the restaurant, my phone rang. And I looked at it, and I was hoping it was her. It was a blocked number. And so I answered it, and the voice on the other end of the line said, this is Constable so-and-so. And I don't remember his name, but my heart just sank. And I said, is she okay? And he says, where are you? And I practically screamed into the phone. I said, is she okay? And he says, where are you? We're at your house. We're coming to you. So I told him where I was, and I turned and I walked out of the restaurant. I don't think I even said 2 words to my guests. And I stood at the side of the road on the curb for, what seemed like forever, but was probably only 5 or 6 minutes. My house was not far from where we were. And this unmarked police car pulls up across the street, and this badass burly looking cop gets out and starts walking towards me. And I walk across the street and sort of meet him halfway across the street. And after identifying who I was, he looked me in the eye, and he said 3 words that would change my life forever. He looked at me and he simply said, Carissa is dead.
Oh my goodness.
Shot and killed by an ex-boyfriend who subsequently took his own life. And
what?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
So
I'm so sorry.
Thank you. So that was, one of those moments. This can't be real. This kind of shit doesn't happen in real life. This kind of stuff.
Not to me, right?
It doesn't happen to me. No, certainly not to me. Middle-aged white dude in suburbia? No.
Right.
No.
You got it all, right? You got the car, you got the house, you got the right. Everything's.
Yeah. So that absolutely rocked my world.
Wow. Yeah.
And then, I had so many people that wanted me to go after the justice system, which certainly let her down. She'd filed all the right paperwork. She had a restraining order against this guy. She'd done all the right things. But obviously, a restraining order isn't going to do anything if the party on the other end doesn't respect it. And so, like I said, I had a lot of people that wanted me to go after and challenge the justice system. How do we put better laws in place? And I just thought, how do we build a better restraining order is akin to putting a Band-Aid on a ruptured jugular. And for me, I thought, the real question is, how do we prevent men like that from existing in the first place? Or how do we prevent men from getting to that point in the first place? And when I look back on everything I've learned in sales and leadership, I started to make some connections. So I told you that I used to bag shit for a living. And then ultimately I worked my way up through the ranks, and I ended up becoming a salesman for the garden supply company. And what I recognized at that point was people don't buy a bag of steer manure because they want to own a bag of shit. They ultimately buy steer manure because they want the feeling they get when they plant that beautiful rose bush or grow that vegetable garden. They don't buy the thing, they buy the feeling the thing is going to get them. And so I started diving into that research as I was looking to become a better salesman, I thought, okay, well, if that's the case, then how do I make a better emotional connection with my customers? And so I really dove into that. And then when I got into finance, obviously finance and investment is a very emotional decision. So I spent a lot of time researching how we as humans buy on emotion and justify it with logic. And what I came across was a fellow by the name of Dr. Antonio Damasio, and he wrote a book called Descartes' Error. And he talks about, in effect, that not only do we buy based on emotion, but in fact, as human beings, we make decisions based on emotion. Now, the man that killed Carissa was a man that made a decision with very permanent consequences based on a very temporary emotion. And so when I started looking at, like, how does that happen? And I look at, if we make decisions based on emotion, and as men, we are actively discouraged from ever exploring emotion. Like, heaven forbid I show you a feeling.
Right.
If we don't understand the underlying emotions that drive those decisions we make, we have zero chance of living a purposeful and fully awakened existence. And so I looked at all of the tactics, techniques, things that I'd learned over the years in sales and leadership, things I used to motivate employees, things I used to incent customers to do business with me. And all of that comes back to understanding, a deep understanding of that emotional driver. And so again, when I look at it, so how do we prevent things like this from happening? It's not about preventing the behavior. It's about solving that emotional gap. And if we can do that, this is why I'm passionate about teaching men the art of emotional reconnection. Because emotionally connected men don't fucking kill people.
Because the behavior is a symptom of the disconnect.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
Not vice versa. People don't act that way and become disconnected. The reason they act that way is because of the disconnect.
Absolutely.
And I think we kind of address it wrong. I feel like there's internal bleeding we're trying to put a Band-Aid on.
Yeah.
Right? And it doesn't work.
Yeah. And the same holds true. So this is what I've taught, as I became successful in business, I'd get invited to speak. And so how do you do that, Mike? And so I'd share how I did that. And again, a lot of that comes back to the same thing. So often we want to try and brute force change a behavior. But if we don't address the underlying emotion that drives that behavior, then, we may make short-term gains, but we're not going to make long-lasting, consistent change.
I think emotionally, that's a very long path, right? But the greatest example you see of what you're saying, I preach this to people all the time, is dieting and stuff like that.
Yes.
What's the underlying change? Because you can see those effects happen real quick. You see the short term effects happen. You see people all the time, they drop 15 pounds. You look great. You look awesome. 3 months later it's gone or whatever. And there was no underlying change there. There was this fake outer shell that was put on temporarily, but because nothing on the inside was changed, the thought process, the thinking, the ideologies, they're back to where they started, maybe even worse, because of the rebound, the reverse
that's right.
rebound.
And sometimes, the poor eating is because I feel poor about myself. I don't feel worthy. So here's how I'm going to get some instant gratification by, eating this cake or this donut. And then it just becomes this whole spiral downwards. So, if I fail at this, I can brute force the behavior. So I can will myself to not eat donuts for a month, 6 months, whatever it may be. But you're right. If I don't address that underlying,
but you're willing yourself to do it, right?
Yeah.
You don't have to will yourself to go hang out with your friends.
Right.
You don't have to, look, those are things that, you like doing, you enjoy, and they're a natural progression of your actions. So what would you say is, I would say like a real common thing you see. I don't want to say a common flaw, but a common misdirection that you tend to see guys making. This is a relatively easy thing to address, at least. Maybe not fix, but address, and be for anyone listening, they can be like, oh, I kind of do that.
Yeah. So how do you deal with that? Is that what you're asking?
Well, like what's like a common trait maybe you see that men have that you like? What's a common downfall that you tend to see among men that's the most common among you? Like whether it's like the fake alphaness or what have you.
Well, again, I think anger is the biggest one, and the challenge is that anger is often sadness masked. So, again, so anger is the secondary emotion. It's not the primary. So maybe we feel ashamed of X, Y, Z. Maybe we feel crappy about X, Y, Z. And then we get mad because, well, I shouldn't feel that way because I'm a man and I should be doing this and I should be able to suck it up, but I can't. And so I must be a pussy, and therefore now I get angry, and then I'm going to act out on that anger. And again, you look at what happened in my case. Like, here's a dude that, I don't know what the underlying issue was with him, but he let his anger get to a point where he pulled the trigger twice.
Right.
And ultimately took her life and took his own life. So, yeah, I mean, that, again, for guys, like, we're allowed to have two emotions, right? Anger and sports.
Right. Sure. Yeah. Like, it's okay to get upset about your team losing.
Yeah.
But like, it's not upset to get okay because someone, said something to you that hurt your feelings or didn't make you feel awesome or what have you.
Right. So,
yeah. No.
So that is the biggest driver that I see. Again, it's this, we make decisions based in anger. And again, rather than trying to address, because anger isn't always, I mean, sometimes it is, but it's often not the driver. It's a result of some deeper feelings. So how do we peel back that onion another layer deep? And how do we really get to that root problem?
Now, is this something that I would assume that you talk about in your book? Tell us a little bit about that. And like, I'm always blown away when people are like, I wrote a book, and I'm just like, because I'm like, where do you even start? You sit down in chapter 1, like starting from the organization of it and everything, it just blows my mind. So tell me a little bit about that process. Like, what even got your wheels spinning to say, I'm going to write a book, and just, I want to hear it.
Yeah. It's funny because what the book ended up being is substantially different than what it started as. So the book originally started, so I do keynote speeches, and almost every speech I would start or I would end with what I would call a 30-day challenge. So I'd say, you know what? Here's all of the stuff that I just told you. If you send me an email, I will send you all of the tips and tricks and techniques and things that I just told you about, and I will follow up with you in 30 days, and I will see what you've done. Because I often used to have presentations within the industry, and of course, everybody would say, well, why would you share your industry best practices? And my answer was, twofold. One, we're not competitors. If we lift ourselves up as an industry, we all do better. But secondly, 90% of you guys are going to do jack shit with this information anyway.
I say it all the time. Yeah, all the time.
So I challenge them. Are you going to be that 10%? If so, send me an email. I'll send you my PowerPoint, my whatever, and I'll follow up with you in 30 days. So then I said, what would be really cool is if I put together a series of 30 days of videos, like just a 90-second, 2-minute video with some little tips and motivational bits for 30 days. So I started scripting those out. And what I found was, I've got 1,000 to 2,000 words per little video, and then it's like times 30, and now I've got 30 to 40,000 words. It's like, holy shit, this is starting to look like a book. And okay, so this could become a book. And originally it was sort of a business book, like, 30 days to a better you kind of thing. And then Chris and I were in Penticton, which is about a 10.5-hour drive from home. I was doing an Ironman event, and my 65-year-old aunt happened to live there. So Chris and I went to Penticton. I did my race.
Chris?
Sorry?
Who's Chris?
Sorry, Carissa.
Oh, Carissa. Oh, gotcha. Okay.
We went to Penticton together. I competed in the Ironman. We ended up back at my aunt's place for dinner afterwards. And she starts, so Carissa used to always tease me about how badass I was. Hey? And as a guy that's always been more geek than jock, more nerd than cool kid, that always made me sort of swell with pride. And so when we got to Penticton and we're at my Aunt Sharon's place, and she starts telling us this story about how, I'm 65 years old. I'm not overly fit, but I thought this year I'm gonna get a little bit more active. And when I saw that you were coming out to Penticton to do Ironman, I thought, they've got a 5K fun run. She says, I'm going to sign up for that. And I knew full well I was going to be dead last, but I wanted to do it anyways. So she tells us this story and she says, yeah, so I lined up way at the back of the pack because I don't want 100 of these kids passing me. The gun goes, off we run. She says, we get within about, a half a mile or so of the finish line. And she says, all of a sudden, this kid on a bike starts riding beside me. And of course, when she says kid on a bike, she's talking about one of the race organizers, probably somebody in their late 20s, early 30s. Right. And she says, so I looked over at him. I'm like, you're here because I'm last, aren't you? And he says, yep, I'm afraid so. He says, you're doing great. You're doing great. And so he rides in with her. She gets within a couple of 100 meters of the finish line. He says, okay, I'm going to ride ahead and let him know you're still out on course. And she looks up and she can see that she's so far last that they've started tearing down the finish line. They've started packing up the PA system. So this guy on the bike rides ahead and tells them that she's still out on course. They set everything back up to their credit to announce her across the finish line.
Oh, that's cool.
Finishes telling us this story. And Carissa just looks at me and she goes, you know what, Mike? She goes, now that's fucking badass. Like, how many of us would have the courage to compete in an event that we knew full well we were going to finish dead last? And to me, that changed the direction of the book. And it started off as redefining badass. Like, what does it really mean to be a badass? It's not about, it's about having the courage to show up like my Aunt Sharon did. Like, that's
right.
Freaking badass. So on that drive home for 10 and a half hours, we talked about, what does it really mean to be a badass? And especially in the context of a man. And so in that drive, the book evolved and became Redefining Badass. And then, of course, so that was August of 2015. And so it was like a month and a half later that Carissa was killed. And that just solidified for me what the book needed to be. So it became much more memoir with lessons. So it talks a little bit about my story. We talked about the fraud, the Ponzi scheme. When I was 17, I was in a really bad car accident, almost died. My parents shipped me off to Australia because I was a little asshole. And so just a lot of stories of adversity and overcoming, and little lessons in between that. So yeah, that's the book. Really is about giving men permission to feel and the power of that.
I think it's super important.
Yeah, so it's not so much a how-to; it's a lot of story with a little how-to. And I think book 2 will be much more how-to.
I like how you described it like permission to feel, right? And because you're not saying what to feel, and it's just like whatever, like feel it and get through it, right? Like don't bottle it up, because then you start putting masks on things and things start manifesting in different ways, and that's not a place you want to be.
Yeah, well, and that's exactly it. And you look at most of the exceptional, if we're talking business, most of the exceptional business leaders, I mean, that emotional mastery of self is what sets apart the great from the good. And, when you can learn to manage that in self, then you can start to learn to manage that in others. And again, it's not about coercion or manipulation. It's about learning self and influencing others. So it's so powerful.
And I think what you say, like in regard, like when you talked about business leaders and stuff, and like I'm a younger business owner, and I'm always shocked when I get to talk to someone who's older and has been in the entrepreneur business owner lifestyle for a long time, and like how calm and cool and collected they are. And a lot of times I'm like not emotionless, but like you can tell in their decision making they're emotionless. I mean, the greatest example of that, I think, is like a Warren Buffett, who's built wealth and over the years, time and time again. Hasn't really taken any losses, but he's not an emotional guy. Like when it comes to anything like that, and he'll even tell you. So I think that's a super cool and unique trait, like that a lot of people, I think too many people equate like this over passionate kind of, decision making process and like driving factor when, I think there's a real fine line between that and having your emotions in check, right?
Well, yeah, and it's about that awareness. So you talked, you were kind of going down that as a newer entrepreneur or younger entrepreneur. Certainly for me, it was go, 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 hustle, 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 hustle. And the problem is that when you're working that hard and you're moving that fast, you can't see the forest for the trees. Like, I run ultra marathons. So I do trail runs. So oftentimes I'll remind myself to just slow down even and have a look around, like, and enjoy the scenery. Otherwise, if I get too focused on the finish line, I don't even notice the forest or that spectacular view. Like this was in New Zealand. Like just practicing that pause to notice what's going on and notice what's going on inside of you. So with awareness comes choice. So recognizing that, if I'm making that business decision just to spite my competitor, maybe that's not the smartest thing to do. And where's that coming from? Or, then you can make the decision. Yeah, you know what? I don't care if it's a dumb thing to do. Fuck him. I'm going to do it anyways.
Right, yeah.
And you can make that decision, but you've made it with intent and not by default.
So just slightly off topic, but so I just did my first triathlon about a month ago or so. I did an Olympic. I didn't do a full Ironman or anything, but so I can kind of relate to you on that aspect. Like, what is it about endurance sports in general? Because it sounds like you've been doing it for quite a long time, and anyone who knows anything about endurance sport, it's not a part-time job, and it's not a seasonal thing, really. I mean,
yes.
So tell me what connections you have with that and why you love it so much.
2 words: controlled adversity.
Okay. So I get that.
It gives you the opportunity to practice. So I've got in 2.5 weeks, I've got a 100-mile race coming up in the mountains. So there's 21,000 feet of elevation over 100 miles. I got 30 hours to finish it. So I've trained, I've prepared, but the first time I did that was 2018. I got trench foot. So I was on pace to do it. And in fact, actually, I've got it here because I was showing somebody else. So this is me at the finish line, 31 hours, 56 minutes.
You still finished it. Love that.
The cutoff time was 30 hours. So I could have pulled the plug 2 hours earlier, but it was like bullshit. So to give you some context, the last leg of the race at training camp took me 1 hour and 45 minutes. On race day with my feet totaled, took me 3 hours and 10 minutes.
Yeah. Because still at 30 hours, 100 miles, I mean, that's still like a little over 3 miles an hour, which, I mean, that's like a walking pace. And it was like, I could walk that. When you start getting at those sorts of elevations and the environment you have to deal with and climbing over stuff, and so trench foot is like when you're like running through puddles and stuff, and your foot's just basically like waterlogged the whole time, right?
Exactly, yeah. So imagine if you sat in a bathtub for 20 hours and then ran on those feet, like they just become hamburger.
Do you sleep during this at all? Because I would imagine it. Like,
no.
Do you have anybody with you? Is there people on the course? Like,
so there's. This one's called the Sinister 7. So it's 7 legs. So there's like 6 different transition areas. So my partner, my girlfriend, would meet me at each of the transition areas, and she just makes sure that, I stuff my face with food, because really at that level, it becomes more of an eating contest than a running contest. You're burning so many calories. And she would, change out my shoes for me and things like that, which we didn't do the first year, but that was the lesson learned. So,
I mean, that's part of it.
So this year going back, we know that as soon as I come into the transition area, I only stay there for 5 minutes. We're going to strip off my shoes, strip off my socks, towel dry them, let them air dry for a minute or two, put fresh socks back on, maybe fresh shoes, depending on how the shoes are. I mean, there's no keeping your feet dry because you're running through creeks and puddles and stuff, but just airing them out at each of those transitions areas. So again, it's that controlled adversity, right? Like, so you learn, you adapt. And, you know, one of the things when I first started triathlon, I followed a guy by the name of Chris McCormick, Macca. And he's won like 12 Ironman races, I think 2 or 3 world championships. He wrote a piece called Embrace the Suck, where he talked about when he moved from short course triathlon to long course triathlon. He said there was no amount of training that was going to allow him to avoid that inevitable suck. So rather than training to avoid the suck, he started training to embrace the suck. And, you know, much as with life, and we talked about it, right? Life is going to throw some suck at you, no matter how prepared you are. So the question isn't, are you prepared to avoid the suck? Because you can't. Like, somebody shoots your girlfriend.
Mm-hmm.
Not a suck I could avoid.
Nothing you could do.
So the question becomes, how well can I endure that suck? And that's what, for me, that's what endurance sport does. That's what ultramarathons do. It gives me, it's an opportunity to practice in the calm for the coming of the storm.
Yeah, no, and I mean, at least for me, like I consciously try to like draw parallels in my life, like when I'm training and like throughout the day, whether it's I'm like, man, I just want to like, I want to be done with this stupid task that I'm doing, whatever. And I'm like, no, finish it. I'm like, dude, you can run freaking 10 miles, like, and not stop. Like, you can stay on this for another 20 minutes. Like, you know, like I consciously try to do that so that, you know, whether I'm running, whether I'm biking or whether I'm doing, you know, like business stuff, like, in the moment, like I have something to lean on. So that's really powerful for me.
Yeah, absolutely.
So moving forward for you as things, you know, the restrictions lift in Canada, you know, 2021 progresses, we get back into normal things into 2022. What do you kind of see for yourself? I mean, I know you said you're probably itching to get back out there and do some speaking, get another book written. Tell us what you have planned.
Yes. So I've got a couple of group training programs that I've really enjoyed. So like I said, 2020, I had to pivot. I didn't know that I would enjoy the coaching piece as much as I do. But I'm really good at it. Because it's what I did as a CEO of an organization for 16 years. But I really enjoy it. And it's great because I get to take aspiring business leaders with an inspired vision, and I get to help them execute. So, you know, again, I get to have my fingers in a bunch of different businesses, and I get to help. Like one of my coaching clients texted me yesterday. On average, she would do maybe $15,000 a month in revenue. Yesterday, she messaged me and said she's at $33,000 for June. So,
that's awesome.
Like that just lights me up when I can help people do that kind of thing. So there's more of that. I've got a bunch of group coaching programs. I've got some programs specifically for men. Called Lifestyle by Design. And again, the intent is rather than living life by default, which most of us do, we just kind of drift through. It's about getting intentional and living a life by design. So those are kind of the things I'm really fired up about right now.
And one thing I want to say too is that I had heard the story. I think you said it was your aunt who was doing the run.
Yes.
I heard that during your TEDx talk. So I'm a very accomplished speaker. If anyone wants to hear more about that and your kind of mindset, I would really recommend going to give that a listen. Because I kind of was just like, you know, just kind of stumbled upon it, and then, you know, 5 minutes turned into 6 minutes, turned into like, I was like, oh wow, like, all right, here we go. Like, this is, you know, I was really captivated by you. So I would encourage everyone to go watch that as well. But all that sounds awesome, man. I appreciate your time today for coming, telling us your story, sharing a little bit with us. One more thing before you leave. We do this thing called Real Talk Rapid Fire.
Yeah.
I want to fire a bunch of questions at you. They're not real noodle burners. So just, you know, first thing that comes to your mind, don't overthink it, don't underthink it. All right.
All right.
All right, man. Here we go. Netflix or Hulu?
Netflix.
Dogs or cats?
Cats.
Triangles or square pizzas? Like, do you like your pizza cut?
Triangles.
Triangles. What was your first car?
A 1969 Dodge Demon.
What was your first job?
Car wash.
Ooh, car wash. All right. What's your favorite city in America?
Ooh, New Orleans.
Ooh, New Orleans. What's your favorite city in Canada?
Probably Montreal.
Ooh, Montreal. Okay. Are aliens real?
Yes.
Edmonton or Vancouver?
Vancouver.
Ooh, okay. And then last one. In 100 episodes, will you come back and check back in with us, tell us some more stories, and update us on where you're at with everything?
Hells yeah, that's a great idea.
Awesome, man. Well, I'm so glad for that you took the time to come out and speak with us today, tell us your story, share everything with us. Do me a favor. I'll put all this information that Mike is getting ready to tell us down in the description as well, but if anybody wants to get a hold of you, they want to contact you, visit your website, your Facebook, all that good stuff, give us the spiel, give us the full rundown, and let us know how to talk to you.
You bet. Best bet is MikeCameron.ca. Again, I'm up in Canada, so it's .ca, not .com. And email is mike@mikecameron.ca. Twitter's @AxiomMike, AXIOMMIKE. Axiom was the company, and that's my handle everywhere: Instagram, Twitter, and also LinkedIn. So. Yeah, I love connection is my middle name, so I love it.
Sweet. All right. Well, thank you so much, Mike, for coming today. We appreciate your time, and we'll be talking to everybody later. Thanks. Out.
You've been listening to Real Talk with Mason. Make sure to like, rate, review, and subscribe. We hope you've gotten some useful and practical information from the show. We hope you've had fun. We know we did, and we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hook up with Mason on Instagram @Real Talk with Mason. Walter Badgett once said, "The greatest pleasure in life is doing what people say you cannot do." And we tend to agree. Till next time.